The rain had turned the mountain trail into a river of mud and loose stone. Clara Whitmore could barely see 5 feet ahead of her as she climbed higher into the Appalachian wilderness, her boots slipping with every desperate step. Behind her, somewhere in the darkening timber below, 3 men were closing the distance. She could hear their dogs baying through the downpour, hungry voices echoing off rock walls and ancient trees. They had been tracking her since noon, and now the sun was dying behind clouds so thick the sky looked bruised. She never should have witnessed what happened at the mill. 2 days ago, Clara had been delivering flour orders along the river road when she heard shouting from inside the old Dawson lumber mill. She had stopped her cart and peered through a gap in the planks, thinking someone might need help. What she saw instead was Thomas Garrett, the wealthiest landowner in the valley, standing over a man on his knees. The man was begging. Garrett pulled a pistol from his coat and shot him twice without changing his expression. 2 of his ranch hands dragged the body through the back doors, while Garrett wiped his hands on a cloth as though he had spilled nothing more than coffee. Clara had stumbled backward into a stack of timber. The crash echoed. Garrett turned toward the wall, and through the gap their eyes met for one frozen second. She ran. She had been running ever since. The sheriff was Garrett's cousin. The judge owed him money. The whole valley operated under his shadow, and everyone who lived there understood an unspoken rule. You did not cross Thomas Garrett. You did not see things he did not want seen, and if you did, you disappeared the way others had disappeared before you, quietly, completely, with no one brave enough to ask questions. Clara had no family left to protect her. Her mother had died the previous winter. Her father had been gone since she was 9. She had nothing but her wits and her legs, and now even her legs were failing her. The rain was relentless. Her dress clung to her body like a second skin. Her hands were cut from grabbing at rocks and branches. Every breath tasted like iron and fear. The dogs howled again, closer now. She crested a ridge and stopped. There, set back against a granite cliff face and half hidden by overgrown laurel and hemlock, stood a cabin. It was crude and weathered, built from logs so dark with age they looked almost black. The roof was covered in moss. A woodpile stood beside the door, stacked with military precision. No smoke came from the stone chimney. No light showed through the single window covered by oiled deerskin. Clara knew this place. Everyone in the valley knew this place. It belonged to Josiah Kane. The stories about Josiah Kane were the kind mothers used to frighten children into obedience. They said he had come back from the war changed, that whatever he had seen or done in those years had hollowed out everything human and left something else in its place. They said he killed a bear with his hands when he was 19 and wore its claws on a cord around his neck. They said a group of outlaws once tried to rob him on the North Trail, and only one crawled back down the mountain alive, missing 3 fingers and the ability to speak clearly ever again. The preacher in town once rode up to offer salvation and came back pale and silent and never spoke of the visit. Josiah Kane wanted nothing from the world below, and the world below wanted nothing from him. Clara stood in the rain staring at the cabin door while terror pulled her in 2 directions. Behind her, the dogs were getting louder. Ahead of her was a man the entire county feared more than storms, more than snakes, more than God himself on Judgment Day. She chose the door. It was not locked. It swung inward on leather hinges with a low groan. Clara slipped inside and pushed it shut behind her. Darkness wrapped around her like a fist. She pressed her back to the rough wood and tried to control her breathing, tried to become small and silent and invisible. The cabin smelled of smoke and pine resin and dried venison, and something sharper beneath it all, steel and stone and solitude. She could make out shapes in the dark, a table, a chair, shelves lined with jars and tools, a fireplace filled with gray ash, animal pelts hung from the walls. Everything was spare and ordered, the home of a man who kept only what served a purpose. Then she heard breathing that was not her own.
It came from the far corner of the room, slow and measured, the breathing of someone completely awake and completely still. A match scraped. Light flared. Josiah Kane sat in a chair against the back wall with a rifle across his knees. The match lit a candle on the shelf beside him, and the small flame threw shadows across a face that looked carved from the same granite as the cliff outside. He was enormous, broad through the shoulders and thick through the arms, with dark hair pulled back and a beard that followed the hard line of his jaw. His eyes were the color of winter creek water, pale and clear and absolutely unreadable. A necklace of bear claws rested against his chest. He did not stand. He did not raise the rifle. He simply looked at her the way a man looks at rain falling, with patience and no particular surprise. Clara's voice died in her throat. He spoke first. "You're bleeding." She looked down. Blood ran from a gash on her arm where a branch had torn through her sleeve. She hadn't even felt it. He tilted his head slightly. "And you're being hunted." It was not a question. He had heard the dogs, too. Clara forced words out. "Please, I just need somewhere to hide until they pass." Josiah studied her for a long moment. The candle flickered. Rain hammered the roof above them. Then he stood, and the room seemed to shrink around him. He crossed to a shelf and took down a strip of clean cloth. He held it out to her. "Wrap that arm." She took the cloth with trembling fingers and pressed it to the wound. He moved past her to the window and lifted the edge of the deerskin covering. For a full minute he stood motionless, watching the darkness outside. "3 men," he said quietly. 2 dogs. Coming the east draw. Clara's stomach turned to ice. "Thomas Garrett sent them. I saw him kill a man at the Dawson Mill. He knows I can testify." Josiah let the deerskin fall. He looked at her over his shoulder. Something shifted in those pale eyes. Not sympathy exactly, but recognition. The look of a man who understood what it meant to be cornered. He walked to the fireplace and began building a fire with quick, practiced hands. Within minutes, flames crackled to life and warmth flooded the small room. He set a kettle of water over the fire and placed a tin cup on the table. Clara watched him, confused. "What are you doing?" He did not answer immediately. He went to the door, opened it, and stepped onto the narrow porch. Rain soaked him instantly. He stood there like a wall between the cabin and everything beyond it. The dogs broke through the tree line first, baying and straining against their leads. Behind them came 3 men on foot, rifles drawn, rain dripping from their hat brims. The lead man was tall and lean with a face like a hatchet. His name was Cole, and he was Garrett's foreman, and the man who handled problems Garrett did not want to handle himself. Cole stopped when he saw Josiah on the porch. The dogs stopped too. They lowered their heads and whined, pulling backward against their leads as though the scent of the cabin itself was enough to override their training. Cole tried to smile. It looked painful. "Evening, Kane. We're tracking a woman, runaway. She's wanted for theft down in the valley. Trail leads this way." Josiah said nothing. Cole shifted his weight. "You seen her?" Josiah stood perfectly still. Rain ran down his face and into his beard. The rifle was not in his hands. He did not need it. His silence was heavier than any weapon. One of the men behind Cole muttered something and took a half step backward. Cole pressed on, his voice tighter now. "She's a criminal, Kane. We got every right to bring her back." Josiah finally spoke. His voice was low, unhurried, and carried the weight of absolute certainty. "No one is in my cabin that does not want to be. No one leaves my cabin that does not choose to. And no one enters my cabin unless I allow it." Cole stared at him. "Garrett won't be happy." Josiah's expression did not change by an inch of a fraction. "Garrett can climb this mountain himself and tell me so." The silence that followed was enormous. Rain filled it. Wind filled it. The dogs whined and pulled. One of the men behind Cole whispered urgently, tugging at his sleeve. Cole's jaw worked back and forth as though he were chewing on words he couldn't quite swallow. He looked at the cabin door behind Josiah. He looked at the darkness of the porch. He looked at the man standing in the rain who had not flinched, had not blinked, had not raised his voice even once. Cole turned around. The men followed, the dogs followed faster. Within minutes, the sound of their retreat faded into the storm, until there was nothing left but rain and the creak of old trees bending in the wind. Josiah came back inside. Water pooled beneath his boots on the stone floor. He closed the door and dropped the bar into place. He poured hot water into the tin cup, added dried herbs from a jar, and set it before Clara without ceremony. She stared at the cup, then at him. Tears she had been holding back since the mill finally broke loose and ran silently down her face. He sat down across from her and said nothing. He let her cry. He did not look away, and he did not try to comfort her with words that would have been too small for the moment. He simply sat with her the way the mountains sat with the storm.